Thank you for having me on your program. I think there are three contexts in which this significant development can be understood. First is the global context. And I think it is very interesting to notice that both the existing status quo, emerging, and the resurgent great powers simultaneously, Russia has concerns, and now the second term of Trump administration has also identified in its first official document the annual intelligence assessment as terrorism as the main and the most significant threat to US national security. So I think the first aspect is the global context, that all major powers consider terrorism as their common and most significant challenge, despite their geopolitical and geostrategic differences. The second is the regional context. I think in the last couple of years, you've noticed that gradually the concern towards regional terror outfits, including those which Pakistan believes are sponsored by India, have drawn concern from multilateral bodies and also world powers. That includes, TTP being identified in the U.S. national annual intelligence assessment as a potential threat to U.S. interests as well. And we have noticed ETIM and IMU as terror outfits which are operating out of Afghanistan, which pose threat to Chinese interests. And then we have BLA, BLF, and Majid Brigade, which have been operating out of Western borders from Pakistan, who have been targeting the Chinese individuals and investments in Pakistan. And the third is obviously Pakistan's bilateral context with China, in which there are certain terrorist outfits which have a record of specifically targeting Chinese interests and investments in Pakistan. So I think in these three contexts, the recent meeting and the joint statement of SCO is very significant. That this proves that the Pakistan's concern towards these outfits is now gradually being shared globally, both at the Western powers and also in SCO. And I think the Indian allegation regarding Pakistan's alleged support for terrorism has also declined globally. I think there are two contexts to this very important SCO summit, which is perhaps the largest ever in history. First is obviously the historical context, because this was the victory parade which marked Chinese successful liberation of its territories, particularly from Japanese occupation and invasion. So I think this historical context is very important, particularly in the Asia Pacific geopolitics, in which Japan continues to be a key US ally. However, very interesting combination of competition and cooperation is witnessed between Tokyo and Beijing, in which there is growing bilateral trade between Beijing and Tokyo, but at the same time, Japan continues to be a key strategic ally of US. And in that context, this historical event in which China is celebrating alongside 20 other world leaders its victory and liberation from Japanese occupation is very significant. However, what is more significant today is that increasing number of the global South countries or the developing countries who have a concern through Western coercion, exploitation, and have a difficult relations with Western powers, view China as an emerging world power which offers economic development and cooperation with less coercive statecraft. So I think although China has not directly challenge the US politically and diplomatically, but you must have noticed a very carefully nuanced concerns regarding the lack of multilateralism, the lack of respect for international law, the growing intervention and lack of respect for sovereignty of the world, of different countries, as the concerns which China used this SCO summit to articulate. However, they are also very careful for two reasons. One is that they want to sound as a more just power, which is sympathetic to the concerns of the global south, but they want to stop short of directly threatening the US because their own economic rise is heavily dependent on the goodwill and access to the Western export markets, including that of the US. So it's basically a very delicate balancing act by Beijing. I think this is a very important question. As a Pakistani analyst, I view the recent de escalation. I would not call it an emerging partnership. I would call it as a de escalation between Beijing and New Delhi as a direct consequence of the huge problems that the Indo US partnership has faced in the last 2 months. I think this offers two significant advantages as a trade off to Pakistan as well. First off, it provides China a leverage over New Delhi as well, and an opportunity to share China's own concerns regarding Indian support for non state actors, particularly those which are taking up arms against Chinese individuals and interests inside Pakistan territory, number one. And number two, much to Pakistan's delight, I think China has emerged, uh, just like the US, as another great power which desires and advises the New Delhi to resolve their lingering regional disputes like Jammu and Kashmir with Pakistan through negotiations. So I think this has sort of intensified and diversified the international pressure on New Delhi, not just from Mr. Trump, but also from Beijing, that both the emerging and status quo world power expect New Delhi to behave and try to resolve the lingering Kashmir dispute with Pakistan through diplomatic means. So I think this is a vindication, this is a support, this is a endorsement of Pakistan's stance, and also that it should be resolved through UN Security Council resolutions, through diplomatic overtures. So that is the second advantage that New Delhi's recent de-escalation with Beijing offers. The third advantage that it offers Beijing is at the bilateral level, that it reduces the threat that India has attempted to pose to New Delhi on behalf of the US. So I think it suits, from a geopolitical logic, Beijing, that the leading bulwark on behalf of the US is now seeking goodwill, de escalation, and closer cooperation with Beijing. So I think it's a geopolitical huge gain for Beijing, actually. Frankly speaking, let me try to explain why optics also matters. Because it is a reality that most of the countries which were present to witness the historic military parade commemorating the Chinese victory against the Japanese occupation, it matters. Optics matters. And why it matters, particularly when the growing coercive statecraft demonstrated by the Trump administration has unnerved the US traditional allies in Western Europe and also in East Asia and Australia. So I think the most of the U.S. allies are feeling unnerved because Trump administration has treated friends and foes alike when it comes to being more demanding in terms of being respectful towards US trade concerns. But at this time, most of the countries which were present as part of the SCO summit are those which have an interest in not just geoeconomics, but want to sustain not the balance of power, but particularly to sustain the multilateral mechanism that the post Second World War world order created, which was based on multilateralism, which was based on the role of international institutions, which was based on international law, which was based on the principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity, which was based on sovereign equality as the core principles of international relations, which unfortunately have been sort of thrown out of the window in the last few years in the recent conflict. So I think these countries do seek some sort of leadership role being demonstrated by Beijing. However, let me qualify this expectation from Global South with a pinch of salt that Beijing wants to be seen as the leader of the Global South, as the moral power, as the just power, but it wants to stop short of directly threatening the US because its own economic rise to thus far is heavily dependent on the goodwill and uninterrupted market access of Western markets, particularly Western Europe and North America. And I don't think China right now can afford to really anger and threaten the Western powers kinetically or militarily. So I think you'll have to wait for a few years for that. I think the triangular relationship between China, India, and Pakistan can be more justly and comprehensively understood if it is seen in a quadrilateral context, beyond region, at the systemic level, which obviously includes the greatest power that the world currently has, which is the US. So I view this regional alliance and its behavior and policy choices as deeply influenced by the strategic choices and behavior of the US. Because if the US China relations become more acrimonious, obviously the expectation and the pressure from Washington increases towards New Delhi to be more aggressive and more hostile towards China, which New Delhi does not consider as in its own interest. And that is perhaps the context in which the recent environment and the relationship between US, China, and India must be seen. Because the current acrimony between Beijing and Washington is characterized by Trump administration's deepening concern that US has so far failed to sort of stop Chinese economic rise. And despite military alliances, they have military alliances, very strong alliance with NATO and Quad. But these military alliances have not prevented China's economic rise. So hence, this realization in the US that the US and its allies have failed to check Chinese rise have led to greater coercion and pressure on New Delhi, that New Delhi needs to be more aggressive and more hostile towards China, not just militarily, but also review and reduce its economic relations with Beijing and Moscow. And that is why that is the cause of most of the problems between Washington and New Delhi, because now New Delhi is feeling stressed, and they felt that for the last 20 years they had a hunky-dory relationship, and US was looking after their rise. But what the US overlooked is something which was imminent and bound to happen. The fact that US overlooked is the fundamental reality that China and India share the geopolitical interest that they both desire a multipolar world, whereas US saw India as a potential bulwark which will help US delay or disrupt the emergence of a multipolar world order led by China. So therein lies the dilemma for the US, that on one side it wanted to seek India as a bulwark to check Chinese rise and emergence of a multipolar world order. But on the other side, India itself used US goodwill, access, support, hard power, and goodwill for its own rise. Which, and it saw that over a few years' time, India itself will emerge as a Asian pole, if not a world pole. And now, when the US coercion and pressure and expectation has risen towards New Delhi, they have realized that having a hostile relationship with China on behalf of US does not suit India's own interest. And therefore, right now, let me qualify carefully, the environment is very conducive for the time being for Pakistan, because Pakistan simultaneously enjoys goodwill and trust with the leading status quo world power, which is the US, and also with the leading emerging world power, which is China. But this is a delicate balancing act which requires very tactful and nuanced diplomacy. And I hope it is sustainable, but it will have challenges in the days to come. I think that's my favorite question because my PhD thesis was on transformation of world order. So let me briefly say that for Pakistan, the transformation of the world order is not something new. Pakistan came into being when a bipolar world order was emerging 2 years after the Second World War. And Pakistan very wisely chose the Western world power for the simple reason it offered Pakistan access to their markets. It helped Pakistan develop its infrastructure, its military capability. It offered it development assistance. And it helped Pakistan achieve a degree of balance of power with India. So it was a wise choice based on realpolitik. Uh, in the early 70s, you would recall Pakistan played the pivotal role in bringing China close to the US through the historic visit of Mr. Henry Kissinger, facilitated by Pakistan. So that is the time that is the process which eventually culminated almost 17 years later with the collapse of the Soviet Union. But Pakistan uh, played as a bridge between the world's most populous communist nation and the world's most powerful democratic power. Even 17 years before Soviet Union sort of collapsed. And again, when after the collapse of Soviet Union, the world system again transformed from bipolar to unipolar. Again, Pakistan emerged as the leading ally of the US against its most significant global threat, which was terrorism. So again, Pakistan positioned itself very carefully as a leading ally in the global war on terror with the unipolar world power. And now, when again the world is witnessing a turbulent world order in which the existing superpower US is trying to delay and disrupt the rise of the emerging superpowers and emerging challenges. But Pakistan has again carefully balanced and managed a very nuanced relationship based on bilateral cooperation without offering any commitment to one pole against the other. So that is a very wise and astute statecraft which Pakistan has so far demonstrated. But my last sentence on this would be that it is very important for the durability and success of this policy of Pakistan that Pakistan should maintain bilateral relations with both emerging and status quo powers based on mutual interests without committing one against the other.